Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, The Cloud and the Next Stage of MSP Evolution, sponsored by SureWeb and presented by Redmond Channel Partner Magazine. I'm Scott Becker, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. Thank you all for joining us. And now on to the webcast. We have two great speakers with us today. Coming up a little later from SureWeb is Eric Beauchamp, Director of IaaS Products at SureWeb, including Microsoft Azure and Performance Cloud. Eric has extensive product management experience with IT and global software development companies. And starting us off today will be Howard M. Cohen, a channel veteran, longtime columnist for Redmond Channel Partner Magazine, and an advisor to partners of all stripes. You're in great hands with Howard and Eric. And finally, just a couple of housekeeping items. We're hosting a Q&A session after the presentations, and we encourage you to participate. We'll have those questions, happening at the end of both presentations, but feel free to type them in at any time. Also, this webcast is being recorded and will be available for replay. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the webcast over to Howard. Howard?
Thank you, Scott, and welcome to today's webcast. One of the first great pieces of advice I got when I was first in the industry back in the dark ages was to always be looking forward. Always try to figure out what's coming next and what do you need to be doing to prepare for what's next. And I'm really pleased about today's presentation because that's really what we're talking about. If I allude to my age, you'll notice my title, Senior Resultant. The resultant means I'm all about results. That's all I've ever been about. I learned long ago that only results speak. The senior means I'm old. I've been around a while, and so that's reflected. But let's get to looking forward. Okay, in today's session, we're going to start off by very biblically talking about in the beginning, in this case, in the beginning of the IT industry, or at least our piece of it, the personal computer part of the IT industry. The rise of the value-added reseller. The rise of the reseller. The rise of the integrator. The rise of blessed monthly recurring revenue. The rise of the managed service provider. The rise of infrastructure as a service. And finally, the rise of a cloud managed service provider. Probably should be talking about the transition to, because none of these started from scratch. Each one was beget by the one before it. And so we're talking about the development of this industry and how it took place. So let's get started with in the beginning. In the beginning, there was infrastructure. If you go back to the earliest day, I'm talking about the 1970s, the 1980s, which most of you hopefully weren't around for. But back then, it was all about building computers. It was all about how we put these computers together, and in a few years, it became how do we connect these computers to each other? What kind of cabling do we need? What kind of communications devices? So it was always about infrastructure. In 91? In 2011, let's come forward for a moment, I talked to a Microsoft person about infrastructure. And he reminded me that when a solution provider, which is what Microsoft calls everybody, when a solution provider talks about solutions, when they use the word solution, what they really mean is infrastructure, because that's all we built. We built first computers, then we built networks, then we built more far-reaching systems, but the one constant, it was always about infrastructure. Later on, I'll tell you what that Microsoft friend further explained to me. Then we saw the rise of the reseller. And this is really when we got named a channel. And I'm talking about August of 1981. IBM introduces the IBM personal computer. Not the first machine out there, the Apple was that, but The IBM, and actually, if you're not talking about Intel-based machines, there were plenty of others. But the IBM PC came out in August of 1981, and IBM had this problem. Nobody but IBM can sell IBM. It's just that simple. And what are they going to do? So what they did was they said, well, okay, what we'll do is we'll sell the IBM personal computer to companies that will, basically do purchasing for a lot of companies. They'll aggregate everybody's purchases into one big purchase order, so we don't have to carry tons of accounts receivable. And these aggregators, will sell to, we'll call them resellers, because they will resell our equipment. This way, nobody but IBM is selling IBM. But these guys can resell IBM. And yes, for those of you who are thinking it, man, was that bogus. But we became dubbed the reseller channel. And both words have very, very significant impact on how things would progress from then on. If you look at the word channel, it says you've got a manufacturer who sells to a distributor, really, who sells to a reseller, who sells to a customer. And if you've heard Jay McBain and others of our colleagues talk about how, the shadow channel, maybe there is, you've read me, I've been saying there is no channel anymore. It's because many of you no longer bother with the manufacturer or the distributor. You go straight out there and deliver services. And products are incidental. So we're no longer a reseller channel, but let's follow the development as we went from there. Next, we had the rise of the VAR, the value-added reseller. Value-added resellers made their money on the sale of those infrastructure products. And let me tell you, when I started in my first Computerland store in 1981 and sold IBM personal computers, the margin that we achieved on every sale, and hold on to something, was 41%. And there was no discounting. So we were enjoying 41% margins in those early days, and life was beautiful. So beautiful that product profit, those 41%, paid for all the added value. We would burn in a system for free. We wouldn't charge anything for that. We would train users. We would support them for a considerable amount of time. We provided all kinds of services because we were making 41% margins. But then the second company I went to work for was the Computer Factory. And we took credit for beginning the downward spiral of margins across the industry. We were heavy-duty discounters. And so, okay, not sure what happened there. I apologize for the little glitch here. I'll just catch us up. After margins evaporated, all of a sudden, there was no margin to pay for the added value. There was nothing to pay for the added value. Unfortunately, our thinking didn't keep up with what was happening. And so we continued giving away services for quite a long time to come. As product faded as the focus for making money, we discovered attached services. All of a sudden, we charged to install something. I instituted something called system prep. When you bought a car, you got dealer prep. Well, when you buy a computer, you buy system prep. And we charged for it, and we did very well. Matter of fact, the first month we did it, we made over $20,000 just on system prep for $35 a box. And it only went up from there. So attached services attached to the product, became the next great source of income for us. This brought the rise of the integrator. We were selling configuration. We were selling system prep, burn-in, if you want to call it that. We were also selling the integration of multiple products from multiple manufacturers together to create better solutions, because Some were the best at one thing, others were the best at another thing, and so we just brought that all together. Of course, we did installation. After 1984, the first year of the LAN, year of the local area network, with the introduction to the world of Novell NetWare and 3Com Ether cards, these are names from the distant past, network design became important. We were building networks, and we were operating those networks with our customers. A few years after that, the first initial seeds of what would later become MSP started happening when we started to monitor. If somebody else is playing with the console, I'm going to ask you to please stop. Let me try and get us back there really fast. Okay. There we go. We began to connect up to our customers' networks, and we began to watch all of the management information bases, the MIBs, in every SNMP compliant device. And while we didn't call ourselves managed service providers yet, it's exactly what we were doing. We used to tell people that, we watch every device, and if any device goes into a problem, we catch it right away. The fact is those devices were very, very, very reliable. What we were really watching for was errors in the carrier, a carrier circuit going down. We were very good at threatening action with the Public Service Commission, and the carriers used to jump when we did that. So that was our great claim to fame back in the early 1980s. We sold training. We sold support. And over time, this whole function of being an integrator really became stock and trade for a lot of us. And at this point, our channel started to polarize between the box movers and the service providers. Next, we saw the rise of monthly recurring revenue, MRR. This was blissful. Originally, the only recurring revenue we saw was when we sold the actual carrier circuits. Many of us partnered with AT&T, Verizon, and other carriers and provided the circuits that connected customers either to their own locations or to the nearest internet point of presence. And we made good money every month. They were paying us for it. And that was really great. What we wished for was other services that we could sell the same way. We were selling our own service contracts. That was recurring. These circuits were recurring. That was nice. Then cloud came along, and later on, when cloud came along, every cloud had an MRR line. Every cloud was a source of recurring revenue because they were billed monthly. And so now, today, you have all kinds of sources of monthly recurring revenue where we really only had one or two. As networks grew, it became obvious they needed to be monitored and managed. And so what we were doing with local networks, we started doing with much bigger networks. And remote monitoring and management, R&M, drove more MRR, more monthly recurring revenue. And with every new monitoring contract, with every new cloud contract, with monitoring of cloud, monitoring of backup, monitoring of monitoring, we were driving more and more monthly recurring revenue. MRR became the Holy Grail. Now, I'm the guy who gets in front of audiences and says, all those people who tell you MRR is the Holy Grail? They are wrong. They are very, very wrong. Why do I say that? It isn't really the Holy Grail of our business. I'm going to ask you to ask yourself a question. When do most MSPs want to make money? When do you want to make money? Do you want to make money next month, the month after that, the month after that, for the next 36 months? Sure. You want to make money later, but really, you want to make money now. You want some upfront revenue to offset the revenue you don't get anymore because you're not selling servers or storage or a lot of those things. So all of the partners that I know, all the channel partners I know that have been successful in the business know they have to have services that they sell now, and services that they sell later, and between the two, they drive the kind of revenue they're looking for. Over time, some became very good at creating what I call the IT Mobius loop. This is a Mobius loop. It's endless. Just keeps going around. And Dr. Ben Casey a million years ago used to use this as the infinity symbol, and that's exactly what it is. It's endless. It's infinite. So in the IT context, everything starts with a project. Customer comes to you, they need something specific done. They need a network built, God bless them. They're relocating to a new facility. They need a new network built. Maybe they need communication services. Maybe they need better routing. There's all kinds of projects that you sell all the time. If you're doing it right, when the project is over and you get sign-off from the customer, the last thing on the list of what they're signing off for should be their managed services agreement, so that you are monitoring and managing the result of the project you just completed. So now here you are, you've got this wonderful managed services agreement, and a couple of months go along. And again, if you're smart, you are reading the reports that come out of your managed services system, and you are sharing them with your customer. And you're talking about, well, we saw this, and we found this, and we noticed that this happens a little too often. So what we're going to suggest is that the next thing we ought to do is this. You have just used your managed services agreement to generate your next profit. I'm sorry, your next project and your next profit. Your next project. And of course, when that project is done, the last thing it generates is a new managed services agreement that you add to the original one. And that leads you to your next project, will lead you to your next managed service agreement, back and forth, around and around and around, hopefully infinitely. This is how you build a bigger and bigger presence within each of your customers. And for those of you who like the phrase, it's how you get stickier and stickier in that account. This brought us finally to the rise of the managed services provider. Finally, we had labeled what it was we were doing and who we were and what the major value was. The reason that became so important is because at that point, infrastructure became a dirty word. I mean, nobody was buying infrastructure, right? The cloud had hit, and between 2006 and 2019, we have seen the cloud take over. Most customers don't want to stand up their own servers anymore. They don't want to stand up their own storage. Cloud has almost completely, replaced on-prem infrastructure. And that's continuing to happen more and more. There will come a point at which having on-prem infrastructure is passé, yesterday's news. The good news about cloud is that it provided higher service levels at lower cost. And this was a compelling value proposition, right? Higher service levels. It's being operated by professionals. This is what they do for a living, not somebody from your office pool who's responsible for managing the computer room. No, this is a professional data center, and they are operating your IT for you. So the levels are much higher. And because we're using server virtualization, you're only paying for a fraction of the servers that you're using. With you and dozens of other customers each paying a fraction, it's very easy for the cloud service provider to make a lot of money while you only pay a fraction of what you used to pay. So for the customer and for the provider, an excellent, excellent equation there. In fact, if you think about it, it's not supposed to be possible. If you're going to get higher service, better service, usually you have to pay more. So this is why cloud became so popular. I'd love to tell you it was a technological advantage, but I think you all know. Cloud is a financial sell. It saves companies tons of money and provides better IT services than they've ever had before. Going from on-prem to infrastructure in the cloud created the rise of infrastructure as a service, IaaS. And It was one of the original first three that everybody talked about: infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and platform as a service. And those still exist today, but now there is everything as XaaS. Everything is being provided as a service. Even services are being provided as a service. But infrastructure as a service is really the mainstay. If you look at a lot of our cloud providers, if you really look at their products, everything that an Azure or an AWS or a Google Cloud platform or top layer, anything they're selling you ultimately comes to you in the form of a virtual machine. And so therefore, it's providing infrastructure services to you that you use for something very specific. So the rise of infrastructure as a service completely replaced servers and storage. And now when companies reach the end of their useful life cycle, they had a new decision to make. Do we buy new servers? Do we make more capital investments? Or do we move this from CapEx to OpEx? Do we make it an operating expense? Much easier to manage, much more predictable, much more budgetable. And in the beginning, and I'm talking about like 2011, 2012, partners panicked. I once had a partner tell me that he didn't believe in the cloud. And I smiled, and I was presenting at the time, and I looked at him and said, here's the good news. It's not a religious experience. Okay, you don't have to believe in the cloud. You just have to look at the economics of the cloud. Okay, it's higher service levels at lower cost. Customers are going to do this. So don't keep lamenting about how to replace your lost infrastructure revenue. Go out and replace it. Find ways that you can replace the really the pittance of revenue you were getting from products. So let's face the facts. You weren't making much on the sale of hardware and software anyway. I mean, it was a pittance. Like I said, it was just a little bit of margin that you were enjoying from the sale of products. As a matter of fact, if your mix was 80% product sales and 20% service sales, it wasn't surprising that your profit mix was 20% from product sales and 80% from service sales. They, are indirectly proportionate. So you weren't losing that much by losing the product sale. In fact, for many of you, the operations required, the logistics required to get the product in and out, plus the cost of extending credit to your customers, ate any profit you were achieving. As a matter of fact, it started to become costly, which is why you saw more and more of you getting away from product, using a third party to provide product, finding other ways to get yourself out of the product business and into the services business, because you were making money on the services. You were making money on installation. Originally, you were just all the attached services. But then you made real money selling those recurring revenue services like remote monitoring and management. All of a sudden, you were making real money there by being the provider who managed everybody's infrastructure. And by the way, going forward, you still will. I mean, that's the bottom line fact of it. Those of you who are working to innovate new services and add to your portfolio, you will be the winners. You will be the companies that survive and thrive, because this is what we have become. We're no longer a reselling channel. We are now a professional practice, providing professional services that customers really need. Those of you who are worried about not having the server in your hands, ask yourself, when was the last time you actually hugged a server? Why do you need to be in physical proximity to it? Why do you have to be able to smell it operating or hear it operating? You don't. Realistically, most of what you do still needs to be done no matter where the server is physically located. And I don't know about you, but I would prefer to be administering the use of the server and fine-tuning the use of the server than actually making the server go. Let somebody else do that. That, to me, and probably to you, is scut work. Okay, so now we've come into this decade, and the cloud has gone mainstream. I mean, we're talking about several years ago. Microsoft's entry with Azure accelerated the mass migration to the cloud. All of a sudden, cloud services weren't coming from some unfamiliarly named company that you've never heard of before. They're coming from Microsoft. Okay, that's a name you know. Okay, and a name you know you can depend upon and rely upon. As a matter of fact, going back to those days, I was at a meeting of the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners, and Vahe Tarosian, an executive vice president from Microsoft, was speaking to us, and somebody in the audience asked, "Why should I sell your Azure, your cloud services?" And Vahe, who was a very nice, pleasant gentleman, truly in the true sense of the word, a gentleman, looked at him and said, "Well, simply, if you don't, within the next 4 or 5 years, you will become inconsequential." I'm here to suggest to you that Vahe was right. As we got into the later half of this decade, cloud is it. And so, here in these early days of cloud, and we're still in them, everything is hybrid. You hear people talking, "Oh, you may want to have a hybrid cloud." Come on, everything is hybrid. Those people who are transitioning from on-prem to cloud, they've got some on-prem, they've got some cloud. That is the definition of hybrid. And it's going to stay that way until they finish their transition. And who knows how long that's going to take. Now, of course, as I said before, Azure's offerings go way beyond infrastructure as a service. There are many others. Fundamentally, they're all pretty much provided using IaaS as a foundation. So it's very important that you have a good grounding in IaaS. One of the things that we're seeing happening now, and I think our next guest is going to talk about a little bit, is disaster recovery. Disaster recovery has always been a sticky point. Why? Because it requires redundancy. And redundancy requires the purchase of equipment that will hopefully just sit there and do nothing forever. Nobody wants to pay for that. Well, cloud-based disaster recovery is far less expensive. You don't have to build a redundant data center. You can simply make the second data center happen in somebody's cloud. A cloud data center can duplicate your data center without you having to build anything. You simply pay an operating expense, a monthly fee or a quarterly fee or an annual fee, to use that piece of the cloud provider's infrastructure to back up your data. And here's the good news. Beyond the redundancy that you have with them, and you may have other redundancy locally so that you have belt and suspenders, but they provide usually additional redundancy. I mean, Microsoft, for example, has hundreds of enormous data centers located all over the world. If you want to use a data center on the other side of the planet so that you're protected if we get hit by a nuclear attack, you can do that. Not only will it be backed up in a local Microsoft server, it'll be backed up in 1, 2, or more other Microsoft data centers located anywhere you choose. So there's multiple redundancy between their data centers in addition to the redundancy of your data center with theirs. Of course, once you've got your customer working with a redundant data center, it may be easier for you to say, well, it works really well as a redundant data center. It's passed every test. It always restores. So why don't we talk about reducing your capital investments and replacing them with cloud for your primary data center as well. And so a lot of people, a lot of your colleagues are using disaster recovery as a great stepping stone to get their customers to embrace cloud. And by the way, that's their customers who haven't already embraced it, because at this point, the last statistic I heard is more than 70% of enterprises have something perhaps most things, perhaps even all things, in the cloud. 70%, almost three-quarters. So we're well on our way to universal adoption. Finally, there was a period of time, and I'd like to think it's over, where MSPs got pigeonholed, where if you were an MSP, everybody assumed that what you supported was on-premise data centers, and you weren't touching the cloud. And so for a lot of MSPs, the cloud was still something they didn't want to talk about because customers didn't look at them as somebody who could support the cloud. They only supported on-prem, and on-prem was going away. Well, a lot of you started to realize that you could take the contiguity of Active Directory for Azure and Active Directory for Windows Server, which work beautifully together, creating one contiguous space. It looks like one logical entity. And so you're not managing two consoles or two trees or two forests. It's all one. That creates a completely transparent fabric between your on-prem and your cloud-based infrastructure until such time as you're ready to move completely over. It makes the entire thing invisible to your customer. But of course, now you have to define what needs to be managed in the cloud. What needs to be managed in the cloud? This gives us the rise of the cloud MSP. Okay? MSPs who they'll manage your infrastructure no matter whether it's local, cloud-based, or a combination of the two. This is a huge customer value. No matter how they are construing their IT, you are there to make it happen for them. You do the needs analysis. You provide the selection of cloud services. You provide, very importantly, the integration, making all these different cloud services with all these different security and other protocols play nicely together. There may be varying protocols, there may be varying standards, there always are. You bring that together. You provide cloud security that covers the entire environment. You provide monitoring, not just monitoring of the circuits, but also monitoring of capacity. You can be guaranteed that when they get their invoice for a cloud service, any cloud service, it will perfectly match the performance and activity report that they get from the provider. The two will always match. That's almost a total guarantee. So somebody's got to keep them honest. Somebody's got to be providing a second opinion on whether or not those cloud service providers are fulfilling their SLAs and providing the quality of service they've committed to provide. Because in most cases, the customer can see penalties paid back to them from the provider if they fail. So you're out there now, you're protecting quality of service. You're protecting those service level agreements. You're managing the cloud providers for your customer. I mentioned capacity monitoring. You're living in a world where everything is consumption billed. Okay? The billing is consumption based. You only pay for what you use. Well, if your customers are leaving resources up, they're still paying for them. If they don't release those resources, that clock just keeps on running. You can be your customer's hero just for being the one who said, whoa, haven't seen any activity in more than 3 hours. Are you still using that? We're going to throttle it down. We're going to save you money. Also, you provide your customers with instant scalability. And this is one of the big advantages of the cloud. You provide them with the cloud's elasticity, the ability to use as much or as little as you need when you need it, and only pay for what you use. You can provide far more extensive automation in a cloud environment than you ever could on their own premises. You can support the unification of the developers and those who operate the computer systems that run their software, which has become a meteoric source of growth. Your services could include application design for cloud-native applications that take advantage of microservices and containers. If you're not doing any of this, you can find out more about it and start to add it to your portfolio, either through getting your people trained, hiring new people, or through partnering with somebody else who's already doing it. Lots of opportunities once you're in the cloud. You're going to put emphasis on the resilience of cloud. The fact that those redundant data centers mean that they seldom, if ever, go down. This is a redefinition of what you need. Redundancy used to be a cost. It used to be something you had to build that cost a lot of money, as much as your primary data center. But now it's not being used. Today, you don't have to do that anymore. You simply use cloud. So we have a whole new definition for redundancy. Redundancy is a good thing. And if I can emphasize anything more than anything else, cloud has always been and will always be a financial sell. Your customer will be far more encouraged to transition to cloud more and more when you can show them how much money they save because they get higher service levels at a lower cost. And quite frankly, that is the greatest advantage. It unifies everybody on the client side that, yeah, we need to go cloud. We save money, we get better performance, everybody's more efficient, we get productivity gains. They start talking about all those soft gains that they never used to want to talk about. So there's only one choice that still remains, okay? One choice that still remains regarding how you, as a partner, approach infrastructure as a service. And that is it's classic. Do you build your own cloud infrastructure and rent it out or lease it out to your customers? Can you justify the expense? Do you have, going into it, do you have enough tenants that you know will be paying for services that you can offset the cost of building that quickly enough and start realizing a true ongoing return on investment? That's a very big consideration. Do you broker? Since there are so many great, big, well-known, reliable cloud service providers out there, like Microsoft Azure, do you simply work with them? The big question, of course, has always been, do you own the customer relationship? Is it you or is it them who owns it? And not for nothing, but Microsoft has done a lot over the last few years to demonstrate that they want you to maintain account control. They want you to be the one that interfaces with the customer, and they will operate the service. Or do you want to integrate those services into your offerings and kind of white label everything? In other words, buy those services and resell them to your customer. Bundling has always been popular as long as there's been IT. Bundling of products and integration of products has always been popular. So how do you choose? How do you choose the path you're going to take? And to give you more insight into how to approach that and how to approach everything we've been talking about this morning, I'd like to introduce Eric Beauchamp from SureWeb. Eric?
Thank you very much, Howard. This was a really super informative session that really captures the evolution of and waves of the IT industry up the rise of the cloud MSP where we're now. So thanks for this overview. So just to have a quick word on ShareWeb. So I'm product director with the Cloud Infrastructure and Services Business Unit. So ShareWeb has been around for 20 years already, but started directly in the cloud as a hoster. And we're now in a massive growth mode as a CSP, as we work currently with over 6,000 partners, a majority of which are MSPs. Number of clients served by these partners is around 60,000 now, and the number of employees doubled in the last couple of years. So the part of this is the catalog that ShareWeb has been building in terms of being a one-stop shop. This is at the core of our mission. So for sure, we are a Microsoft-first partner. So we were looking at the waves that Howard was describing. So Office 365 definitely a riding wave is still on. But what we're seeing now is Azure and other IaaS offerings that are truly picking up. So ShareWeb doesn't offer hundreds of SKUs. Instead, the philosophy is really that we offer best-of-breed products so that we can focus on them and really help MSPs grow their business on this so that we can fully support them versus having, again, hundreds of SKUs but not being knowledgeable about them. So this is truly a differentiator for ShareWeb. Now, if we look back at the IaaS information that you presented, Howard, this is 100% aligned with the expertise of ShareWeb in terms of growing the business. So every year in October, ShareWeb has the Accelerate Cloud Summit. And so just a month ago, one of the sessions was specifically about how to build predictable IaaS revenue stream. What we see often from customers is that when they start selling VMs, pay-as-you-go mode, so you have variability in terms of the costs, in terms of how much you're billing your customers. So this is very different from regular SKUs that are fixed like Office 365 and such. So how do you work with this to build a recurring business that you can really make predictable? So we covered several topics like this. These are the types of items that when you work with ShareWeb, you will get guidance, you will get best practices, tips on every single of these items. So whether it's using reserved instances for Azure VMs, using cost optimization tools to make sure that you're right-sizing your resources, or maybe you're using a bill-ahead fixed cost approach so that you can upsell premium plans. That's all part of the type of guidance that you will receive working with ShareWeb. So we also touched on how to start your journey as a MSP in the cloud by offering a cloud DR, or disaster recovery as a service. We just saw it a few slides ago, some of the pros of this offering. So let's say that you work with ShareWeb for this. One of the key aspects is simplicity. So you want to quote easily, you want to understand your costs, so you can just come to the website and you will have a simple calculator for enter number of VMs, how much gigs do you need, how many CPUs, how much RAM, and you get your numbers there. Whether it's Azure Site Recovery, whether it's a Veeam technology like in this example, you will get the expertise to help you build your quotes and really make sure you're confident speaking with your customers to create those offers. In addition to this, so when you're selecting your provider for disaster recovery, you have to make sure that you're working with a trusted partner that will have all of these criteria here. So proven success, meaning not being you offering this type of solution, understanding the partner ecosystem so that things like white labeling and having a strong partner program where you get discounts based on the volume you'll be selling, that's in place and really well working. And it's also critical that you understand the shared responsibility for security and uptime. So let's say a disaster occurs, you flip the machines on, so make sure you have a RACI in place, that it's well defined and you know who's responsible for what. So this is the type of items, again, that with ShareWeb you will get guidance on. Beyond disaster recovery, if you look at the broader picture, so as a full business spectrum, when you deal with a CSP partner, are you using an intuitive transacting platform? Is it very simple to deploy products and to receive your cost for this? Are you able to get help to properly market your services, generate enough leads for yourself, differentiate yourself from other players in your area? Is your provider having integrations like Autotask, ConnectWise, PSAs, so that you can save time when you build your customers? Can you bring in your costs from your partners? So these are the things that ShareWeb is really a leader on the industry. So, and then we see the growth that is actually the result of this. And then when you talk specifically about IaaS, well, we have the expertise here in compute, networking, storage. We have teams of architects that will create diagrams as part of your quotes with your customers, since we cover both Azure plus our own data centers as well. So again, it's not SKUs on the shelf. It's truly expertise that is available for you. 24/7 technical support, this is a given nowadays, but having a really strong score on NPS and making sure that agents are properly trained and really responsive, this is also part of our DNA at ShareWeb. So it's a very short description, but just to give you an idea of if you partner with us, the type of services that you would receive with ShareWeb. So with this, I'll pass it back to Scott.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the overview. And so at this point, we're going to go into the Q&A portion. And so if you have any questions, just type them into the console, and we'll get to as many as we can. And while we're waiting there, I had a couple of questions of my own. Eric, this first one is for you. Excuse me. How much technical experience do MSPs need to have on staff to get started with IaaS? Do you need to hire a bunch of people to get into it, or not?
So that's a good question. So, we will cover both scenarios where, depending on where you are in your journey, if you work with ShareWeb, we can do, for instance, managed services on your behalf. So in that case, setting up all the VMs, the networking, and the entire environment is something that will be done at the beginning of the opportunity. But then if you want to have that service done for you, it's one possibility. On the other hand, if you have this expertise or are building it, then of course you can do it on your own. So it's not a prerequisite to get started on IaaS, and especially if you go with disaster recovery, which is a simpler way to get started for your own education and your customers as well.
Okay, great. So disaster recovery, that's a common one. And let's go in the other direction. So, the first question was about, how little do you need to get started? But, after disaster recovery, where do you see partners finding sort of the next opportunities? If they take disaster recovery as that first step, are there common routes that they sort of head to next, or do they sort of branch out pretty broadly? What do you see?
Yeah, so what we see happening is that once DR is in place, with this, you have a lot of the steps done already for migrating the production cloud servers. So because you have those replicas in the cloud with your customer, you're able to show the performance, show that when you flip those machines on, you will get the similar performance as what you have on-prem, if not faster in some cases. So just this in itself is leading itself to an opportunity to migrate those production servers. So what we see the most often is some firms and their customers will run for a year or two on DR and then transition to moving those servers in the cloud. Not all of them. So we saw that hybrid is definitely the most common model. So for some servers it will make sense to stay on-prem, but where it makes sense, we'll see migration of those and at a cost-efficient approach. Yeah.
Okay. And Howard, one for you. You talked about some huge customer value in things like cloud service selection, cloud services integration, cloud security. When you were sort of going through all those, among all of those, are there things that you see as a really good place to start?
As a good place to start. Well, I guess I'd have to go back to a bunch of years ago. I wrote an article for eWeek magazine where I asked cloud partners who'd already gotten pretty far, what is the first cloud service that customers buy from you? And almost universally, the answer was data backup, cloud data backup. Now, part of that was because we had been doing that for years. We didn't call it cloud data backup. It was remote data backup. But it was the same thing. So we were familiar with it. And as a matter of fact, it made a lot of sense to customers as well. Why do customers hesitate? They hesitate because they don't know that they can trust the cloud service to perform. They don't know they have no experience with it. So picking something simple like cloud backup and making it part of a belt and suspenders approach so that there's a local backup and a cloud backup, so they're not taking any risk at all. It's also a very low-cost cloud service. So from the perspective of convincing somebody that cloud is safe and cloud is superior, I would start small. I would start with a very simple, small service like data backup.
Okay, great. This next question, I guess I'll direct it to Eric. It comes in from Andrew, who says, each time I've priced out Azure IaaS, it seems to be significantly more expensive than on-premise equipment. You're saying, when comparing apples to apples with CPU, RAM, et cetera. So far, it hasn't made financial sense to move. Am I missing something? Eric, any thoughts on that?
So on that front, in terms of pricing, for sure the cost is not the reason why people migrate. We don't say, switch to Azure definitely for the cost saving. That's not the first reason. It's for all the other benefits that you will have around this. This being said, for over a year now, we've seen Microsoft releasing Azure reserved instances. So it's a way for you to reserve the compute part of VMs for 1 year or 3 years, and you would get a discount that can be in the neighborhood of 70 to 60% price instead of the full retail. Now, if you also add Windows Server Sub as part of this, you're able to get savings where you're paying 40% of the regular pay-as-you-go cost of all of this. So more and more we're seeing this, and actually last month Microsoft made public these reserved instances where you can pay on a monthly basis, because before that it was upfront. You had to pay full amount for 3 years, but not anymore. It can be on a monthly basis. So this, I think, Andrew, if you look at comparisons with those costs, I'm sure that you will see that they will match much more than before.
Scott, if I could.
Please do, Howard.
Scott? Yeah, I have an answer to the question as well. I'd like to add to Eric's, and that the answer is yes. You are missing something. As a matter of fact, unless I'm mistaken, you're missing a lot. You mentioned comparing apples to apples, and you're not doing that. You're comparing apples to a bite of an apple. When you go to cloud, more happens than you just paying for the service. First of all, there's a complete change in your operating costs. When you go cloud, you're no longer paying for the facility that you keep everything on site, on-prem. Okay, you're not paying rent on a data center or even a computer closet. You're not paying for electricity for all that equipment. You're not paying for cooling, high volume air conditioning for that network closet, that facility. You're not paying for maintenance of the equipment. You're not paying for people to operate the equipment. I mean, I can go on, but all of the costs that you eliminate when you move to cloud more than offset the difference in price. Price is only the first thing that happens. What you really want to look at is the total cost of ownership, the TCO. I don't like to use the cliche, but it really is true that over a short period of time, you'll realize that you're spending a lot less. Also, there is the value that you get back when you take your people who are operating your equipment off of that assignment and put them onto something more productive. You're getting a lot more bang for your buck out of your own people. So the analysis that it takes to really compare the cost of operating your own on-prem system versus operating using a cloud-based system is just a lot more on that spreadsheet than you list here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Howard. And Eric, I had one other question that brought to mind, which is that, I guess, one of the things about SureWeb is, you work with a fairly, small group of vendors, compared to, just like a giant distributor. And especially Microsoft, you've got some good familiarity. I mean, is there anything you want to say about some of the Microsoft incentives that are available to Microsoft partners that SureWeb is able to help, point them to or help them qualify for in terms of, Azure pilot project money or things like that?
Yes, definitely. So as part of that close relationship, we have access to Microsoft Teams and preview of all the technology and all the programs for helping firms get started. So just a week ago, we were working on a proof of concept, got some funding for some of the firms that were starting something with their customers. So we have specialists here at ShareWeb that will help you out to get your NPM, out to get the competency so you can get those quarterly incentives, also called cashback from Microsoft, and so that we can guide you on this, because it's really nice programs, but they're not so simple to understand. So by having guidance on that level, it's also definitely making a difference as part of your profitability for laaS. It's true for Azure, but it's true for Office 365 as well and other Microsoft products. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Super. And I guess, Howard, one last question for you. Where can people get guidance about combining cloud services properly?
Well, I suspect that question would be better placed with Eric. I think that ShareWeb probably has a host of services that can help in that process.
So are you referring to specifically to laaS, or just to understand your question properly?
It doesn't say on the question, but I would think that they're really talking about any cloud services.
Okay, so if we refer to hybrid mode properly, in this case, I mean, we will have different best practice diagrams and suggestions based on the types of workloads. So we would have some setups where some are running still on-prem. You could have parts that are on Azure, others on AWS. So the hybrid mode and the ability to have them work together is definitely something that we provide guidance as part of our pre-sales activity.
Okay, great. Hey, well, I think we'll leave it there. We're coming up on the top of the hour here. So just I want to thank Howard and Eric, both of you, for sharing a lot of great information and insights today.
Glad to do it.
And also, yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
I also want to thank ShareWeb for sponsoring our webcast today. And finally, thanks to everyone for attending. We hope you got a lot out of the event. And as I said at the beginning, there will be an email in about 24 hours with the when the replay is available. Feel free to share it with any colleagues who might benefit from it. So enjoy the rest of your day, and this concludes our webcast.